Good evening. We're back with more Marvel Champions, and this evening will be a deck analysis and buying guide for this Spider-Man Peter Parker leadership deck. I think it's a good time to talk about why all of these hero spotlights have had the leadership aspect. I've talked about this a little bit in the gameplay videos. The game Marvel Champions was not really built for solo play. You can play it solo. If you have not played the game before, is it worth picking up if you're only going to play solo? Absolutely. It's a great game if you like card games. In particular, if you liked something like Lord of the Rings, LCG, or Arkham LCG. There are similarities, there are also major differences. The deck building is not as intense as in Lord of the Rings LCG, and that isn't as good for solo play, but the game wasn't really designed with solo play in mind, though they did give it some afterthought, I think. But the way the game was really designed is the game is designed for multiplayer gaming groups where every player in the group doesn't necessarily own any cards. So a typical scenario that Marvel Champions was designed for will go like this. One player in the gaming group will buy a bunch of Marvel Champions cards. Then the other players will come over, and then they will all build decks, and then they will play. Well, the game is very friendly for that scenario because 15 of the cards in the deck are defined by the hero that you choose, and then your card pool after that is limited by the aspect that you can choose. And typically in a multiplayer game, each player will choose a different aspect, at least unless the collection is sufficient that multiple players can choose the same aspect. And if you're in that scenario where each player is choosing a hero and then each player is choosing an aspect to play, well, the game is that's the way the game is designed, because you don't have to make that many deck building decisions. Just the 15 cards from your hero are already set for you, and then you just have to look through and see what aspect and basic cards that you want, and then you can go. So it's a deck building light game. It is not as intensive as a typical CCG or an LCG like Lord of the Rings, but there's not no deck building either. So it's very friendly for gaming groups where not every player necessarily has a collection of Marvel Champions cards. However, in a lot of ways the game isn't designed for solo play, and as it was designed with multiplayer in mind, the developers envisioned that typically in a 4-player group, each of the 4 players would play a different aspect, and I don't think they were necessarily worried about making all the aspects of equivalent power in solo play, though I think perhaps they did imagine that a player would use an aspect to fill in the gaps in a hero's kit. Like, for example, a hero like Spider-Man that doesn't have strong thwart. I think the developers imagined that the players would typically choose, or often choose, Justice to supplement Spider-Man's meager thwarting abilities, Justice being focused on thwarting. So players would choose Justice for Spider-Man to thwart. The problem is this. Events in Marvel Champions are almost never as efficient in terms of the value that you get as allies. Allies are nearly always more efficient than events. A typical event in the Justice aspect would involve you paying 2 resources to thwart for 3, or maybe 3 resources to thwart for 4. Well, if we played an ally like White Tiger, we get to thwart for 2 and block an attack and draw 3 cards, or 2 cards if we're in stage 2. If we play an ally like Nick Fury, we can thwart for 4 and then block an attack, or we can thwart for 2 and draw 3 cards and block an attack. If we play Moon Girl, we can draw up to 3 cards and thwart for 2 and block an attack for 3 cost. So you nearly always get more value out of your allies than you do out of your events. And that means that in solo play, the strongest aspect is nearly always going to be the aspect that has the strongest allies. Not always, but nearly always. The exception to the rule being niche situations where you need a rush down strategy, and in which case you might want to go aggression. Or there's a limited number of heroes that use one aspect better than they use the others. An example of that would be Shadowcat, because of the way that her phased ability interacts with defense cards, or Iron Man because of the tech upgrades that are present in protection. But typically, if a hero doesn't make especially good use of any one aspect, leadership is the way to go, because allies are more efficient than events, and leadership has the most efficient allies. Those allies being White Tiger, Maria Hill, Kalu, and Beast, the top 4. Each of those allies generates card draw and or resources when played. And in addition, you have cards like Rapid Response, which can allow you to recur allies cheaply. And you have cards like Regroup or Strength in Numbers, which can generate resources. And you also have Clarity of Purpose, which isn't strong in every hero, but I do think it's strong in Spider-Man. So it would be great if every aspect was balanced and each hero was good with one aspect over the others, and that aspect was not always the same. So for example, if we had 10 heroes or 8 heroes, I would love it if 2 of them were good with aggression, 2 of them were good with justice, 2 of them were best with leadership, and 2 of them were best with protection. But that doesn't end up happening in solo play. Instead, what happens is leadership is best for everyone except a couple of heroes. And the only reason that you would play any of the other aspects is if you're in a multiplayer game and you don't have large enough collections to justify multiple players playing this same aspect. Or you have 2 players already playing one aspect, and a third player playing that aspect would be limited because the allies that they might want to play would already be on the table from other players playing that aspect. That's the only reason to play other aspects. You never really play another aspect other than leadership, because that aspect is stronger with your hero than leadership. Leadership is pretty much stronger in solo for every hero in the game except for a select few, which is unfortunate. The remedy to that would be making stronger events. If you don't want you could make stronger allies for the other aspects as well, but then the game would just entirely revolve around allies, and events and upgrades and supports no one would play them. So they wanted the strongest allies to be in leadership because that's the ally focused aspect. The problem is they didn't make the events in aggression and justice and protection strong enough to match the efficiency of the allies in leadership. If they had done that, then we would be looking at a game in which any one of the aspects could be the best, and it would probably depend. Each hero would vary in the aspect that they would prefer. Like Spider-Man would probably use justice if the events with justice were they equivalent to the leadership allies. But they aren't. The way the game is structured, allies are always, or nearly always, more efficient than events or upgrades or supports, and therefore the best aspect is nearly always leadership. So that's why nearly all of my hero spotlights have used leadership, because I'm not so focused on what's fun or varied. I'm focused on showcasing each hero in their best possible light. That means using the strongest or one of the strongest decks that I think is available to them. I say one of because sometimes I'll be wrong or I'll discover a stronger deck later. But at the time that I spotlight each hero, I'm using what is, in my opinion, the strongest deck for them. Now, that does make it easier if you're a solo player only, because you don't have to pick up cards for all the aspects in the game, really just leadership. And you take whatever you can get from the other aspects and not worry about it too much. Anyway, my philosophy on the different aspects, and let's dive into the Spider-Man deck analysis. We've got some new cards that we haven't seen in the Hero Spotlights before, but I think they are very strong in this deck at least, though I will say that Spider-Man does not have that high of a ceiling in terms of the difficulty of quests that he is able to do. So, the cards that we're running, we got Beast from the Cyclops Hero Pack, we've got Captain Marvel from the War Machine Hero Pack. Captain Marvel's an ally that I like quite a bit. Provides a lot of value, though not always. Nonetheless, you could easily swap out Captain Marvel for another ally, whatever ally you like the best, really. Captain Marvel isn't so high value that she's irreplaceable, and I wouldn't say she's worth picking up the War Machine Hero Pack for, all on her own. We've got Ironheart from the Wasp Hero Pack, who makes it into a lot of decks, Kalu from the Mad Titan Shadow, and Maria Hill from the core set, Moon Girl from the Nova Hero Pack. Moon Girl is an auto-include in any deck where the alter ego has Genius or the identity has Champion. In this case, she can only be played if we're on our alter ego side, but she's so strong when we can play her that she's still worth including if you have the Genius alter ego trait, at least in my opinion, even though you can't play her when you're on your hero side. Then we got Stinger from the Ant-Man Hero Pack. I like to include Stinger in Avengers decks. And we got White Tiger from the Mad Titan Shadow. We got Strength in Numbers from the Captain America Hero Pack. Strength in Numbers is a card that I like more and more as I move along. Even if it only draws one card, it cycles itself. Assess the Situation from the Ant-Man Hero Pack that is just cycling itself. Get +1 hand size, so you lose one card now, you gain one card next turn. Regroup from the Drax Hero Pack, Clarity of Purpose from SPDR, and Rapid Response from Black Widow. The cards that can be replaced, Captain Marvel can be replaced, Stinger can potentially be replaced, though Stinger and Assess the Situation. I like these cards a lot. So, one of the best things that you can do with aspect cards, with your aspect and basic cards, you want to play aspect and basic cards, at least in a lot of cases, you just want to play cards that cycle themselves. Because the design of the game, the aspect cards are nearly always weaker than the hero specific cards. The game's designed that way because the developers wanted the gameplay to revolve around the heroes. They didn't want the aspects to be the star of the show. The aspects were meant to fill in gaps in the hero's kit, and they were meant to fill in gaps in the way that I described, where if a hero had weak attack, he would run aggression. If he had weak defense, he would run protection. That's how the game was designed. It didn't end up that was the best strategy because allies are so much more efficient than events, but that was the design of the game. And as the aspect cards were designed to fill in the gaps in a hero's kit, they were nearly always designed to be weaker than the hero-specific cards, though there are some exceptions. Namely, most of those exceptions are allies, because as I mentioned, allies are very strong in Marvel Champions. But in almost all other cases, the aspect and basic cards are weaker than the hero-specific cards. So one of the best things that you can do with your aspect and basic cards is simply play cards that cycle themselves, because cards that cycle themselves will allow you to get to your hero-specific cards, which are stronger, more often, and you will get more plays out of your hero-specific cards when you play aspect and basic cards that cycle themselves. With the aspect and basic cards nearly always being weaker than the hero-specific cards, the ideal deck with your aspect and basic cards would probably just be a deck where every single aspect and basic card simply says draw one card and costs 0, because then every aspect and basic card would simply allow you to cycle through to your hero specific cards, which are stronger. Now that's a pretty ridiculous situation, but nonetheless it does turn out that cycle cards are really strong in Marvel Champions simply because They allow you more plays of your hero cards, your hero specific cards, and this deck runs a lot of cycle cards. Assess the situation as a cycle card. Strengthen numbers is a cycle card. Regroup is a card that doesn't cycle, but it pays for itself, and when combined with White Tiger, can cycle itself. Can cycle, or when combined with Moon Girl potentially, because White Tiger only draws cards after you play from hand, and Regroup brings allies back to hand. And in Heroic 1, I'm liking Regroup more and more because in Heroic you very often get 2 attacks from bosses. If you have 2 allies on the table and you get 2 attacks, both of those allies can return to your hand. Regroup is not as valuable in standard play because typically you only get 1 attack in standard, but in Heroic it's extremely common to get more than 1 and be able to return 2 allies to your hand in the same turn. So that's our Spider-Man deck and the philosophy behind it. What is Spider-Man's ceiling? He's an A tier hero, along with heroes like SPDR, Nova, and Venom. I would rank him in that group as better than any of those. He's better than SPDR, better than Nova, better than Venom. Not as good as Star-Lord. So he's the second best hero that we've spotlighted. But he did flunk out on Green Goblin Mutagen formula, and so his ceiling for the kinds of quests that he can defeat is not that high. He is going to struggle with consistency against the harder scenarios in the game, and the problems with his kit, well, A, he doesn't really have any functional threat reduction at all. He has to rely on what the allies can do for threat reduction. He does have Web Shooter, or not Web Shooter, but Spider Tracer, but it's not that common to get usage out of Spider Tracer. His damage is not that great. He's got the swinging web kick, and 3 for 8 is not bad, but it's nothing exceptional either. It's acceptable. And the strength of his kit is his defense and his resource generation. And his resource generation is okay, but it's not S tier. He generates 1 card for every boss attack. And he can generate 1 resource per round when he's on his alter ego. That's above average, for sure. Enough to get him into the high A tier. But nothing exceptional. He's not an S tier hero, in my opinion. And the other strength of his kit is Backflip, a very strong defensive card when you would take any amount of damage from an attack, prevent all of that damage. Webbed Up is not efficient, though it does give you something to do with resources when you don't have another play. But the deck really relies on Backflip. It relies on generating some cards from defense until you can cycle through and get those swinging web kicks in situations where you can actually afford to play swinging web kick. And that's how he downs bosses. He was designed to be the protection hero in a 4-hero team from the core set. Since he's a core set hero, nearly everybody has him, which is good. Is it worth picking up all of the packs that I have here in order to make him good? Only if you really like Spider-Man. He's nothing exceptional. He's fun. And it's nice that you already have him, but you gotta pick up some things to really get the most out of him. He improved a lot after the core set. I didn't think he was that good in the core set because he really needs these allies in order to fill in the gaps in his thwarting. Justice isn't efficient. The Justice events aren't efficient, so running Justice to fill in the gaps in his thwarting doesn't elevate him to S tier. But really strong allies are able to fill in that gap and at least get him to A tier. So anyway, that's my opinion on Spider-Man, and thank you for watching.